Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom and welcome to Synagogue Crunch Time. Okay, I think the people who are laughing were maybe on the temple board at some point. They know what I'm talking about. This is the time just at the end of the Hebrew month of Av, when we suddenly wake up and find that the high holidays are right around the corner. And suddenly everything starts ramping up. Hebrew school is about to begin again. Programs for fall need to be planned. The grand synagogue reopening is just around the corner, September 12th, don't forget. So it's the time of year when it would be wonderful to have a softball Torah portion. One with a sweet story, a clear message, and a nice moral. But no can do, says the Jewish calendar. Instead, we have Parshat Ekev. Parshat Ekev contains messages from God that I imagine were deeply comforting to our ancestors. But at least to me, great in every way on our modern values and sensibilities, and stand in complete opposition to everything Reform and progressive Jews claim that we are as a people. Parshat Ekev takes place towards the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy, final 5 out of 5 books in the Torah. And the Israelites are standing just on the edge of the promised land, and they're listening to a long and lyrical speech by Moses. Throughout the verses, Moses is doing what you'd expect. He's reminding the Israelites to keep the commandments, to pass down the rituals to their children and grandchildren. But in Ekev, he begins to weave in a war cry. He begins to prepare the Israelites for the violence that will accompany their takeover of the promised land. Moses instructs the Israelites to destroy any nation in their way. Moses says, "Show them no mercy." And the text seems to delight in the violent leveling that the Israelites will rain down on these nations. Moses says, "You will wipe them out. You will obliterate their name from under the heavens." In the past, my inclination as a Reform rabbi and Jew is to pretend that this part of the Torah just doesn't exist. In fact, I have given sermons on this very Torah portion before and only focused on the lovely parts, of which there are some. It's this chapter that we also get the quote, "Man does not live on bread alone." But I don't know that looking away from the most difficult parts of our past actually serves us as a Jewish people. Our texts are full of beautiful and valuable stories and ideas, but they also contain violence, corrupt leaders, and people who do terrible things to one another. And our texts contain these terrible things because real life contains these terrible things. And so sometimes I like to think of the Torah less as a perfect document and more as a time capsule, the kind that you might have buried in your backyard as a child. Our ancestors created this time capsule that reflects the rules and ideas and stories that made sense to them. And it's the job of each generation to take it out and open it up and take those stories and decide what they're going to do with them. And now I understand that we're not going to all relate to these verses and these stories in the same way. Some of you might say, this makes sense from a historical perspective. Or you might say, Rabbi, this is the reality of war. But I promise you that if you read through our Torah, you will find something that you really don't like. So what do we do when we come across parts of the Torah that repel us, that misalign with our modern values? There was a rabbi in the 2nd century named Rabbi ben Bagbag, And he was recorded in Pirkei Avot, which is a collection of sayings that have to do with ethics. He was recorded as saying, we have to turn and turn and turn the Torah. Sometimes we're turning it over and uncovering something new. And sometimes it feels more like we're shaking it. We're turning it upside down. We're assuming that inherently Jewish posture of wrestling with its meaning. But by turning over and wrestling with our stories, I do not mean just shrugging our shoulders and saying, oh my God, it's so complicated, and then walking away. Wrestling with texts can mean reinterpreting them. It can mean disagreeing with them. It can mean vocally condemning them. And you might think that this posture of reinterpreting or even condemning our own texts makes sense only because we are Reform Jews and we have a very modern and flexible relationship with Jewish law. But this wrestling exists truly in every era and in every denomination of Judaism. A famous example of this that I'm sure some of you have heard before is the example of a rejection of a line in Torah that is in response to Deuteronomy 21, where the text talks about somebody known as the Ben Sorer Umoreh, the wayward and defiant son. Deuteronomy 21 tells us if you have a son who is a Ben Sorer Umoreh, if you have a son who is wayward and defiant and who does not obey you even after you discipline him, you are allowed, according to our Torah, to take him to a public gathering place in your community and say, this is a wayward and defiant son. And then the community kills him. The community stones him to death. What a horrible instruction to have in our holiest texts. But we certainly are not the first to be horrified by it. The medieval rabbis, who we refer to as the rabbis, who shaped so much of Judaism the way we live it today, the rabbis condemned this instruction immediately in a way that makes sense for their time. The rabbis make it legally impossible for this rule to play out. They pile on restriction after restriction, so many that it would be impossible to prosecute somebody for being a wayward and defiant son. And they add so many of those restrictions that finally the Talmud declares there never was a wayward and defiant son. This never actually happened. It just exists for us to learn what not to do and how not to be. But there's something really odd about this tension in our tradition. Why would we continually read over thousands of years rules that are morally repugnant to us out loud, not every week, but every year, at temple or in our Jewish communities, just so we can say out loud, we condemn them, we disagree? I think the answer to that question lies in our name, lies in remembering that we are Am Yisrael. Translated means we are the people who wrestle with God. We are the people who assume a posture of wrestling. We assume it honestly, openly, out loud, with every inch of life in every part of this world. And we've developed this posture of wrestling over thousands of years, and it's helped us build a muscle to confront the things that are difficult and terrible about the world in our own time. And sometimes this constant wrestling makes us a little bit difficult. It makes us a little bit annoying as a people. And I think this is a huge blessing. What a blessing it is in a time when so many news cycles contain a sense of looming darkness, when freedoms that previous generations fought for are suddenly at risk. What a blessing it is to have this posture of wrestling. To not feel powerless, but to remember we turn that Torah, we turn our holiest texts over and over and over again. We are God wrestlers. We can be a thorn in the side of violent, anti-democratic forces that continue to sweep through our world. Some of those forces are working very hard to make us feel helpless and passive and distracted. And so in this moment, we need our Judaism, we need our wrestling more than ever. We need it to remind us that the heart of what it means to be a Jewish person is to be a person who engages out loud with what is difficult in the world, who responds. We've been trying to practice this wrestling in small ways and in big ways at Emanu-El. We've been trying to feed people who are hungry. We've been calling our representatives every week through our Do One Thing initiative, which you're welcome to join every Thursday on Zoom at 12 p.m. And even this Sunday, you can join me and other Emanu-El members. We are co-hosting a rally organized by the Israeli organization Unacceptable. This Sunday at 11 a.m., we're going to be rallying with Jews around the country and around the world who are demanding that the Israeli government end the war, bring home the hostages, and flood Gaza with aid. I have to be honest, this doesn't always feel like enough. And I'm sure that you sometimes feel this way too. But whenever you're feeling that helplessness or that overwhelm, I hope you'll think of us. I hope you'll think of this community, of these rabbis who desperately want to hear from you, of this people who want to get together and say, you do not have to wrestle alone. Shabbat shalom.